We're back, but before we get started, let's give a round of applause to DJ Switch.
Our first panel of the day focuses on the user experience. In an industry that is constantly evolving, there are no careers that could be described as linear. To discuss the road to and the future of design, we welcome to the stage moderator Justin James Lopez, Market Intelligence and Talent Management, and panelists and senior UX designers Kat Christensen, April Huerta, and Donald Burlock Jr. Take it away, Justin.
Welcome everyone, my name is Justin James Lopez and I'm here with April Huerta, Kat Christensen, and Donald Burlock, who are all designers at Amazon in their own unique spaces, which we'll learn a bit more about in just a second. But what we want to talk about in today's discussion is exactly how their journeys have brought them into the creative and design spaces, how that has manifested differently in their unique spaces within the design community, and also how they've been using their experiences to then amplify what the next generation will have to work through and really give back to that next generation. So before we jump into any of the deeper questions, I really wanted to give you three an opportunity to introduce yourselves and tell the audience really what perspective you bring to this conversation. So maybe we can start with you, April, and we can talk through how did you get here from, being a young child to deciding design, that's my thing. How did we get to that point?
It wasn't obvious. I come from a middle-class family, and college was a little bit out of pocket for us. So I went to community college for 3 years. I transferred to USC, and I graduated with a degree from the School of Fine Arts with a fine arts degree. And I didn't really know that I was going to be, in UX and information architecture. I didn't really plan that. I think I graduated and wanted to become an artist, and I landed in an emerging tech field. And I started out as a digital designer. And from there, I think I just kind of got my passion for UX. A lot of the books started to emerge, so I read books on it. And I had a lot of really great mentors. And then, my career just kind of took off from there. So, yeah.
Yeah, but always kind of wanting to be in this kind of creative space.
Yeah. I had a focus on ceramics and photography, and I think it lends itself really easy over to UX and information architecture. They're very controlled mediums. They're very, very specific, very structured, and you still get to be creative within it. So, yeah.
And Kat, what about your journey? Was it linear like that as well? Or?
No, it wasn't linear. I definitely knew I was creative from when I was very little. I moved a lot. I'm originally from Venezuela, and moving into the States, my parents would always get notes from the art teacher and saying that I loved art. So I should have taken a note from that. But I started off in photography and videography, and majored in advertising and marketing, and then my first role in my career, I started doing graphic design, art direction, and advertising world, and I was always really interested in more of the digital side, so I was doing both print and digital, and I always was interested in how websites were built and how to do everything online. And I kind of fell into UX, which I didn't even know was a thing. And once I got my first role there, originally it was meant to be production work, very bottom of the totem pole situation. And I picked everything up really quickly. It clicked for me. And I loved the aspect of it being a mix of analytical and creative. And also having the ability for it to be not as subjective. So in advertising or graphic design, the client's always, right as far as if they like it or not. And I like how UX is more focused on the customer and how the customer is really the one that's right. And we're really trying to make their experience better.
Yeah. And Donald, is this trend?
I was going to say this trend is trending the right way, because certainly I feel the same way. I fell into design. I was fortunate enough to have a mom who encouraged pursuit of expressiveness, if you will. So from a really young age, I remember working on all these random projects, modeling things with clay. For a little bit when I was a kid, I used to go to a museum. I'm originally from Indianapolis. And this museum had all of these different galleries where you could like experience different cultures, you could work on these different projects, you could interact with people from all over the world. And that was like my way of feeling super inspired and being able to express myself. I had no clue like where that would lead in life. So for a number of years I worked in engineering. I was a big proponent of science and math, and just thought that was the path, right? It was encouraged, especially being a young black kid coming out of the Midwest, middle class family. Going to school and becoming an engineer was looked at as something respectable. You could build a career, and it was fantastic. I mean, there were a lot of really good things about that, except I felt very much that all of that expression that I built during my young years, I wasn't pursuing that. And long story short, I sort of fell into design because I was working in the automotive industry and happened to be at a plant in Michigan, which led to going to one of the facilities where they do some actual design work for the dash of vehicles. And I remember walking by a studio, and that was life-changing. I had never seen a studio. I was in my mid-20s, and there's all of these people in the studio, and they're manipulating this machine, and it's carving clay. And the wall is full of drawings and sketches, and right there I was like, it was like reconnecting with my childhood. I just felt the same energy as when I was young, expressing myself, and I said, I have to figure out what this is. I don't know what that is, but I'm really interested in pursuing it, and that's how it started. That to me is my awakening, if you will.
It sounds like there's almost this roller coaster that you go through, right? And you're tiptoeing back and forth between these worlds. What I'm hearing is that sometimes this creative, and I heard it from you, Donald, so I'll come back to you on this. You said that you moved into engineering because it felt more of a respectable space that you can build a career from. And this is interesting because the creative space, I think, this may be rooted, and correct me if I'm wrong, it may be rooted in this idea that the creative space is such a dark portal that you almost don't know if you're moving in the right direction, right? You don't have a guiding light all the time. And Kat, you also kind of mentioned of the subjectivity of it. So how do you, now that you've all found your way back, right? You found your way back to design. How do you know that you're moving in the right direction? What was the moment that said, this is the actual thing that I need to do, not engineering, this can be respectable, and this is the right thing for me?
I feel like every designer has like an Apple story at some point. So I have an Apple story, and it really was the thing that helped me make the pivot. It was my opportunity to see that there were companies that appreciated design careers, because up until that point, I knew about architects, I knew about fashion designers, and I had friends who had gone to art school. They were working professionally as graphic designers, but I just didn't see a path that felt like I could build a career, like a long-term career. And I remember I was at a conference where there happened to be a few representatives from Apple, and one of them happened to be a mechanical engineer, which my background was in mechanical engineering, but this person was working in product. And they were working very closely with old school Apple, so this is still Steve Jobs' Apple, with designers. And I remember I just talked to them for like what seemed to be like hours. It was probably like a solid hour of taking this person's time on the floor. And that to me was the turning point. Like I actually heard that you could build a career as an industrial designer. I'm like, oh, what's an industrial designer? So, it was just peeling back lots of layers to just understand, oh, there is an actual career path where, you're not necessarily going off and being this independent creative. You're actually at a company and you're getting a salary, and people expect you to be really creative. And I thought, I want to try that. Let me make that type of pivot.
Yeah. And shifting through that subjectivity, Kat, how do you know that you're doing the right thing? or is it like, is there still some subjectivity when it comes to like the clients, or like how do you know that I'm actually doing well in this space?
Yeah, I think there's definitely subjectivity and creativity anywhere. But I think UX is so unique in that we're really focused on the customer and trying to make the right steps. And if not, we pivot and kind of make changes. But it's funny, I had a very similar situation as far as growing up. I think engineering or being a doctor or something was more the better path. And I definitely had a lot of struggle with wanting to go into the creative world, and had conversations with my dad where he was like, go into engineering. I was like, originally wanted to do videography, and he was like, don't do that. But funny enough, there was a moment early in my career where UX was starting to be more of a career path. And like I said, I really didn't know what it was. And I think it was shaping when I first started. And my actual technical title was engineer. And so I would joke with my dad and be like, I made it. I'm an engineer. And didn't you have to go to school for it? But I think for me, it's just, I think that ability to do analytical and creative really just clicked for me. And I'm able to work in both of that. And it just makes sense for me. So I think it feels right.
So here's a curveball, right? A curveball creative question, right? Now that you've all shifted and now you're designers, creative professionals, and I'll start with you so you all get a chance to think about it, but you're on the hot seat. So if you could describe your design journey with one emoji, what would it be? And why?
The emoji would be the flexed bicep.
Okay, all right. Flex bicep. All right.
I love it.
And why? I think what I didn't know going into art, going into school, my mom and my dad were always very supportive about art. So going into it, I always thought it was going to be like things would happen or it's all emotional. And it's coming into design, it's a hustler's game. Like I've discovered that it's something that you have to learn to be able to communicate appropriately. You need to be able to put yourself out there. I'm a little bit of an introvert. So, you have to learn how to navigate those, not get rid of the introversion. I really like that, but learning how to navigate that and still being able to go out there and talk, and reason and state things coherently. So, and then there's just a passion for learning. What I love about our industry is it's constantly evolving and it's so amazing. Like I'm, from year to year, I'm always learning something new. There's either emerging tech. And so I think, if I had to describe it, it would be that little flex emoji. Like,
yeah, flex emoji.
It's a little,
I like it. I like it. Powering through it. All right, Kat, let's go.
Okay. So mine is the house plant.
You guys are good at this.
I think that's a newer emoji, but I did not have a green thumb a long time ago, and now I'm like, I have a ton of plants and love it. But it definitely it's like a learning curve to understand how much water, how much light, how much nutrients I need to add to my house plant. And I feel like that's the same with my career. I had to learn what I needed to thrive and grow, and what actually interests me and what I really want to focus on in my career, and the skill sets I need, the people, the networking, and just like the problem spaces that I'm really excited about. And so I think the plant emoji is mine.
So good.
All right, on the hot seat.
I mean, these are amazing. This is a great question, Justin. For me, it's a rocket ship. That's my favorite emoji. I think it's probably because rocket ships, they can go into orbit. You can land on planets. You can discover amazing things. They can explode too, and they can go all over the place. So talking about nonlinear paths, I mean, I really feel like the rocket ship describes my pivot from this career that was. It was the engineering path and level 1, 2, 3, 4, et cetera. I saw it to this path of what are you doing now? Who do you work for? Are you UX? Are you ID? What are you doing? You're at a startup now. Sometimes things would go extremely well. Other times I would get on the phone with people and they're like, oh, you fell from grace. And your product failed or your company failed. And I think the rocket ship feels like it just not only describes my career, but how you made it very personal with the plants. I feel like personally it describes my life, because inevitably when I made that shift into design, it changed how I interacted with people. I was also quite introverted, and I realized, well, I need to be able to present well. Oh, I have to be able to contend for something that I believe is the right decision for whatever's being put into the world. And that's going to require some things that I just had not developed. I didn't have that aptitude yet for making a point, landing a presentation. And so inevitably sometimes you fail, right? Sometimes it doesn't work out and your rocket ship doesn't go anywhere. But then when you do take off, it's an incredible feeling, especially when you have other people along with you for the ride. So that's my emoji.
I love that it goes back to science too.
Yeah, right? Bring it back. Other people, you keep dropping these gems. Other people along for the ride. You mentioned, and there was a bit about this in all of your responses earlier, you mentioned the idea of, with good intentions, your parents or people in your life really kind of guiding you in a different direction, because they want you to move into something that's, again, respectable, that you can build a career that's safe, almost, right? Who are the people that were on the other side of that? Who are the people that were champions for you or are champions for you? And it doesn't matter if they could be the same people and they changed, right? But who are the people that are your cheerleaders, really, in this journey? Kat, let's start with you.
Actually, funny enough, I think my parents were super supportive. I think regardless of the choices I made, I think it was definitely a moment of, are you sure you want to do that? And where I landed, I think, was it just made sense, and it was it ended up, my career ended up growing and blossoming. But throughout my career, I think I just found my people in the different roles I was part of, and just was able to relate with the way that they presented themselves or advocated for design, or just the way they did their UX processes, and learned from them, asked a lot of questions, tried to collaborate with them and work more closely, and just kind of found my way and the way that I do my UX process now. And so just finding the people that actually help you grow is really important, I think, in different roles.
How do you find those people?
I was recently in a conference, and somebody was talking about that, and they were saying, like, if you see somebody in a meeting and they're just like, the way that they're talking and the way that they're presenting that just really resonates with you, you should reach out and just be like, hey, can we have coffee? Let's chat. And just, I think people are willing to talk to you, and just you learn from them, and just kind of recognizing that you relate to somebody that's around you in your surroundings.
How hard is that for you as an introvert, April? Not to pick on you, but how hard is that aspect of building that network?
Not that hard in that I'm an introvert, but when I'm of service, I become an extrovert. I've found that out. Like you said, I didn't know how to manage my introversion, and my mom is always so great, just find a way. And one of the things I do know is that I'm more than happy to help, and so that does pull me out of my shell if I'm being of service. So the other way to help me build my my network is because either I'm either in service or I am rules oriented. I know this is going to sound pretty robotic, but if I see somebody that I really like, it helps me to have the exact purpose for that communication instead of this nebulous, because I'm not good at soft conversation. I freak out about that. So I can't just go up and talk to somebody, like, oh yeah, so I just wanted to chat. Like, I'm not good at that. So I come with a list. Like, I'm that girl, right? So I show up with a list, and I'm like, these are the reasons why I enjoyed your conversation. These are the things that you said that I really liked, that resonated with me. And these are the questions I have for you. And that helps me facilitate that half-hour conversation I'm not freaking out. I'm not talking about the weather, and I actually get what I need. So those are the two things for me. They're of service. So mentoring is super easy for me, even though I'm an introvert, and asking for mentorship, being very specific about what I need. It also helps them to understand what the dynamic is. And then the expectation that I would like I really like this person who's speaking. Based on the first conversation, what would be my next steps? Kind of like a meeting at work, like what would be the next steps that I would like to suggest afterwards, and maybe there's none, maybe that was enough.
Yeah, maybe you didn't answer the questions the way I wanted them.
No,
so you're
I'm
done.
so sorry.
No, I'm talking about like that's how you approach the situation. So how receptive are people to that? Or do you find that it kind of varies when you approach the situation that way? Because I know that that's your process. Yeah. But how does that relate to other people's process when it comes to building the network? Or, how has your experience been in that way?
I can only speak for myself and introversion. So when I am mentoring, there's some extroverts that have no problem and I don't mention it. They're like, yeah. So I thought I'd talk to you and our conversation's brilliant. And I'm like, oh my God, I want to be you when I grow up, right? But in the cases where, they're stammering, that person, being of service steps in and I'm like, relax, like we're just people. Let's just talk about, and I usually kind of revert to my own script, but I ask them like, okay, so like, what is it that you're looking for? And I kind of ease them back in so I can tell like, depending on who they are and the type of conversation. So if they're looking at me for mentorship in that sense, I can kind of read it. And if I know that they're struggling, then I can only suggest what I know works for me. And then they can go ahead and try it out.
Yeah. And Donald, who are your people? How have you found them throughout your career?
Yeah, I mean, the entire time I'm listening, I'm also thinking at the same time, there's no way I can list everyone who has played a role at some moment or some phase in this journey. And there's people, obviously, who are playing a role that lead to us all being here right now. I think what does come to mind, though, is we talk about archetypes a lot, and sometimes archetypes help us accelerate as designers. And so I do think about certain archetypes of individuals in my journey who have played a really pivotal role in helping me in my just overall growth, especially when I was just starting out and I had so many questions, going back to that last question about, is this the right path? Should I be doing this? Or should I stay where I'm at? Should I get deeper in industrial design? Or UX is becoming really big. Do I start to spend more time on digital products? And so along the way, I think some of the characteristics of those archetypes have really come into existence as I've grown in my awareness of the types of individuals who are saying something to me that not only I resonate with, but challenges me. I think a certain aspect of design, because it can be very ambiguous, requires this heightened sense of consciousness, this heightened sense of awareness, right? As you're having discussions with people, sometimes you're going to pick up that this person is giving you something that is worth considering. It could be a new concept, it could be something that they're working on, something they've discovered with their skills. And I think what has happened along the way is I've had people who, they will hear me, and it's really special to be heard. Not everyone, especially in the design space, and you're working with other very technical people sometimes, will hear you out. And so when you have someone who's listening to you, actively listening and saying, well, have you considered this? Or, what about that context? Does that give you a lot of energy? Is that really interesting? And then I think for me, what has happened along the way is I realize, oh my gosh, this person's really giving me something special here. Maybe I should look into that. I didn't think about that path before, I'm going to check that out. So I think as I've grown in my consciousness and just my general awareness of the types of individuals who are complementing how I solve problems or how I bring inspiration, to a meeting, that helps me in terms of understanding, okay, these are the types of people I need to continue to connect with and bring around me.
Yeah. So we're talking about this idea of community, right? But I think that one thing that's very common, especially shifting into these larger corporate environments, is we don't always have our community with us, right? Now, and what I want to address now in the next question is the idea that we hear, especially, and you may have heard it in your time in corporate America, is being the only, right? and walking into a room and being the only person from your specific underrepresented category, whether that is Black or Latinx or being a woman in that room. How has that impacted your experience in transitioning to design, or just being a designer, or just being in this large corporate space? Because it's something that we all deal with, right? So I'm interested to hear that journey. Donald, let's go back to you.
Oh my gosh, so many stories. Yeah, I know I have a lot of stories. I think the one thing I will comment on is this is still something that I am experiencing. This has not gone away. I felt like at some point in my career, I would maybe not feel like I was the only. Like I would somehow have built enough of a network internally to weekly, monthly, feel as if, okay, yeah, I'm feeling a lot more connected, you know, like I've built this community around me. And it's true, like I do have this community, even, you know, at Amazon, I'm building this community. But sometimes that feeling of being the only has not gone away. There are still rooms, right, that I walk into and I know I have to present to leadership, and there's, you know, 10, 12, 15 people in the room, and a little thing in the back of my mind, I don't know if it's the imposter syndrome or whatever it is, it'll pop up and it's like, you're still relatively young, you're Black, maybe you have not built up the credential here, even if I did have the credential. So there's all these like conversations that I'm like, okay, we got to table that because you got like 15 minutes to like deliver. And so I'll summon everything that I've gathered along the way to deliver. But I guess in short, without getting too deep, because I want to leave this question for everyone, that's what I'll say. It's still sometimes a feeling that comes to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How are we feeling about that, April?
I identify like 1,000%. Being Latina, being a female, you know, I started my career in '99, so that kind of gives you a little context as to my age. But, you know, for the longest, for over a decade, I was the only woman and or Latina there. I've walked into rooms where I'm the only woman and Latina, and there are moments, you're right, like, you know, I become hyper aware of the situation. And, you know, I think one of the things just watching my dad, you know, is, and I don't know that he ever specifically said anything, but just watching him is, you know, taking up space. Like I've seen my dad, he can take up space, and I always loved that about him. And so, you know, in these rooms, I just remind myself that there is a reason why I'm here. I'm a professional, and I try to take up as much space, especially as a woman. It's, you know, regardless of ethnicity, like, you know, making sure that you are big enough and take enough space in the room that's equal to. And so, you know, communication is another tool that I use heavily, you know, so that they understand that I'm being absolutely very specific and very intentional about my language choices, right? So there's a different shift, another person that kind of comes in. There's a lot of amazing things that happen real time, you know, that's so complicated and so marvelous, you know, that I think that we're able to adapt to, where you're shifting energies, you're switching beings, you're switching, you know, identities, you're switching everything just to be able to navigate this, you know. And I was fortunate enough early in my career that, you know, males and white, you know, really took, my first mentors really took an interest in me without me asking, because I was too young and, you know, unaware of what I was doing. Now they would be really true allies that before I even understood what that was. But yeah, there's this chameleon thing that happens real time, and you got to remember your pitch and drive it home. So
drive it home. Yeah. I like the take enough space that's equal to. Yeah. I'm gonna take that with me. I'm putting that in my pocket, right? Yeah. And so, Kat, what about you? What has been your experience with that?
Yeah, I can relate to both of your stories. For me, for sure, being the only Latin woman and being the only woman in some of my roles. The role before Amazon, I definitely was the youngest, the only woman in my whole department. And it took a lot of learning and courage also to just stand up and be heard. I oftentimes would get interrupted or like not heard, and I'm like, I'm not done talking. So it definitely, I think you build up your confidence. you make sure you're articulate and that you have your points. But when I do mentor people, especially at Amazon, one of the things I always say is speak up. Like, actually say your opinion on the meeting. Because I think that's something that we are able to really do and bring people along. And whatever level you are, you're able to have an opinion in meetings.
So what has been your favorite piece about being a designer at Amazon? Like, and we can just stay with you on this one. Like, what has been your favorite piece about, and we can continue with the thread of like, how does that culture, how have you trained yourself to bleed that into the experience, or just in general? What has been your favorite piece about being a designer at Amazon?
Yeah, I think when I first got to Amazon, it was definitely like shock because how big it was, and everybody was like, it's going to take a while to get adjusted. But I think like the design community is really big. I think I really like the endless possibilities that there really are at Amazon, and we work with really smart people, and I think we're able to really advocate for the customer. And going back to one of our leadership principles, being customer obsessed. And I really love that because for UX, that's like the biggest thing. We're the ones always advocating for the customer. And oftentimes I found myself being the only one in the room doing that. And I think with Amazon, our culture, we really get to push on that. And also I feel like regardless of where you are in the company, you can reach out to another designer, and oftentimes they're more than willing to meet with you and talk to you about their experience or help you out with something that you're trying to figure out.
Donald, what do you think?
Honestly, I feel like it's also values. I've been at enough companies where there's the hyperbole of a mission statement and then leadership principles. They're never really worked out in practice, or at least they're worked out within a department and then they don't translate across the company. One of the interesting experiences for me so far as a designer is understanding how these leadership principles, some of them I really do practice weekly, I really do feel weekly, both the tension of them, the high energy of some of them. Customer obsession definitely is one of them. I think about the person who's going to use my products all the time, whoever they might be. I think that's probably one of the biggest drivers for why I still am in design, is knowing that I could have fingerprints somewhere in the middle of this thing that's going to be out in the world. That responsibility still gets me going in the morning. And so that customer obsession leadership principle, I think, still is very much part of the type of fuel I need as a designer to keep me going. It's not just doing something conceptually. Nothing wrong with that. But I think that there's a lot of really hard problems to solve in the world. And I think there are phases where doing conceptual work makes sense, but then in this phase of my career, I think there's some practical things that are worth solving. And so I think that's why, as a designer, I'm inspired to be at Amazon.
Well, first off, this.
Yeah.
I mean, and not to be, light about it. There's not all companies follow through with an opportunity to be able to communicate this way and openly and honestly about some of it. So the community, the groups, onboarding, I just signed up and I was like, okay, because, you're so hungry for it, and you're right. Like sometimes there's departments that will kind of do it. I came from a big company and I was so hungry for all of that. So but then I think you're right, user-centric. The opportunity, we're still, I know the industry's been around for a bit, but we're still so new. And the opportunity to take, customers' mental models, right? Like trying to understand and get involved and trying to match them with what we think, or concept models of what we think is supposed to be like, and constantly get feedback from those users. It's amazing, and we're still so new. And I know Amazon's huge and we're established, but there's so much that we can, think through. There's nothing's done yet. And I think that's amazing. And day one attitude is amazing. That we're not done. And yes, we're established, but we can do so much more. And I love that energy about it.
Yeah, I wasn't fully bought into the day one mentality at first, when I first joined, but then as my experience, and I'm sure you're feeling the same way, over time you really do start to feel that from the people that you work with, that idea that you can always do something more and go beyond and really kind of work backwards and look at what's coming next. So let's talk about what's coming next, right? When it comes to the work that you all are doing, what advice do you have for the next generation? What work are you doing to help that next generation? I know as we heard some of your stories, some of it has been quite a bit of a roller coaster in figuring it out. How can we help the next generation have less to figure out? Maybe we can start with you.
I love that. In the later part of my career, that's kind of been my focus. My previous gig, I started a mentorship program because there's no real way to kind of connect young with, more experienced designers. And I was privileged to be able to have that program. I still have strong connections from that program, but I think, making myself available for mentorship, and it doesn't even have to be official. I'm available on LinkedIn, and if I have the time, especially for people who are new, don't feel too hesitant about reaching out on LinkedIn to ask for support. There'll be people that are experienced designers that are willing to hear you. Just kind of keep the energy up, because I think in our day-to-day, the minutia of our day-to-day, it can get a little bit, you can lose sight of day one, or you can, get bogged down, but keeping that energy up, I think is, especially for my mentees and my mentors, helps me.
Yeah, I think mentoring is a huge thing. I'm really passionate about it, and just kind of being able to give back. And because I think growing up, I would have loved to have more mentorship and more guidance. And I think there's a lot of stumbling that happened. And I learned to find my way, and I learned to find my people. But I definitely feel like if somebody reaches out, I'm more than willing to help and give advice where I can if I'm able. And so I do have several mentees that I'm able to help them and coach them and get started in their UX career. And I think it's important to lean onto people that have that experience and learn from them. And I do the same. I reach out to my mentors and people that I admire to learn, and just having that continuous just hunger to learn more, even with having a long tenure in the career. Especially as UX designers, you have empathy, and then also it's constantly evolving. Like you were saying, emergent tech, everything's always changing. So it's important for us to be open to new things.
Mm. Wow, that's good. I'll say it's changing for me. Last several years, it's been about the portfolio. I always wanted my work to speak before I showed up, so that when I showed up, all I had to do was close, so to speak. It's shifting to trying to bring more visibility to my story. I think that one of the things that is becoming more critical is to try and get visibility on this journey that I've had. I don't know if I've really attributed a lot of value to that journey. It just was what it was, all the twists and the roller coaster. And so that's been changing, and I've been thinking, well, I don't want to build visibility around my story just so it's my face out there. It's, let me build visibility on this story, because there are so many people who are extremely creative, and they don't have that exposure early enough to understand you can build a career, a really successful career in this area, in some aspect of design. And so that's what I've been working on. I've been trying to figure out, how do I scale the individual discussions I have with mentees? How do I figure out how to talk about my story in a way that lends itself to application for people? So it's kind of this new phase for me.
Yeah, I love that. Well, thank you all for joining me on this discussion. What I gained from this was, it's okay not to know the answers. And it's okay not to make the safe decision. It's okay to have to find your people, and take up the space that you have earned. And I think that those are beautiful. And thank you all for listening, and thanks again for joining us today.
Thank you.
Yeah.